Today's show is brought to you by locally owned and operated Highland Rim Speedway. Highland Rim Speedway is celebrating its 50th anniversary this year with great short-track, door-to-door stock car racing in a safe, family-friendly atmosphere. Visit their website at highlandrim.com. Jeff Meeks and Chris Austin invite you to watch your favorite sports event at the Batter's Box at 43 Hermitage Avenue in Nashville, Tennessee. The Batter's Box offers shuttle service to all Titans home games. It's a great place for friends to gather for the game and after the game. So check out the Batter's Box Bar and Grill, and thanks again for sponsoring the show.
Well, Happy New Year. I'm Joe Williams, and along with Larry Woody, we're going to start off 2013 the same way we ended 2012, and that's visiting with Nashville racing legend Gary Baker. It's coming up next right here on the brand new edition of Pit Pass.
If you're looking to learn guitar, check out Dave Isaac's Guitar Studio on Music Row. Whether you are a beginner or hobbyist, to professional songwriter or artist, Dave offers a unique and powerful method of instruction that teaches not just the instrument, but the whole musician. Find out more at NashvilleGuitarGuru.com. From the family grocery hauler to fire-breathing racing engines, the one name you need to know is USA Motor and Machine, located at 51 Cleveland Avenue in Nashville, Tennessee. Give them a call at 615-726-3725 or at usamotorandmachine.com.
Well, welcome back once again, everybody, to Pit Pass. I'm Joe Williams, along with Larry Woody and our special guest, Gary Baker, the Nashville racing legend. And Gary, we're going to get this table a little bit bigger and just keep you here, I think, for the rest of 2013.
Well, I have a lot of fun. It's always a good bunch of guys around, so you got a good bunch like this. But I'll tell you, Woodrow and I, and get you at the table, he and I start saying it, and then you correct it. And most of the time, we both figure it out, and you got it right. We didn't write it down like you did.
Well, it was yeah. I didn't write it down either, but I sell it better. No, we just...
Gary, looking ahead to the new year, anything on the horizon in terms of, I know Baker Curb Racing is, I guess, suspended operations, for want of a better term right now. Anything on the horizon racing-wise for Gary Baker?
I wish I could say yes, but the fact of the matter is, actually, no. Every once in a while, you'll get a phone call from somebody that says, hey, want to get into it? If I'm willing to put up the money, would you ramrod a team, kind of? Well, the answer is yes, but obviously I want to see the check first.
How long would it take? Manna from heaven falls out of the sky, and,
like a sponsor.
Yeah, and a little company down in Franklin, Common Sense Consulting, for example, walks up and says, "Here's $10 million. I want to go nationwide racing." How long would it take you to put everything together? Could we be, I mean, it's January, could we be ready for Daytona?
It would be impossible, but it would be done.
You can do the impossible.
It would be done, yes. You could you move that fast? Yes. You would have to call on a lot of help from a lot of people. And we thought we were there. I'm trying to remember the time frame, a year ago this time. It was, no, actually, it was just before Christmas. We had a sponsor that really looked solid, really did. And they wanted to actually, on nationwide, but also run 6 to 8 cup events the following. We had Brian Vickers come in. We talked with Brian at great length, and Brian signed on. We already had a tentative contract worked out with Brian. He was great. We basically had all the people in position ready to go, and we told them, you give us the definite go by the 3rd week in December, as well as I remember it was, and yeah, we will definitely be at Daytona with Nationwide, not Cup, of course. Right. It would take longer with Cup. But even at that, I think we had talked in terms of something like Atlanta, Bristol for Cup. So can it be done? Yeah, but you've got to call. And in that case, it was, we were looking at Ford and Dodge, back when Dodge was still in racing. And Roger Penske, of course, known that guy, is a great guy since back in the 70s. And frankly, I called him and leaned on him some. And they were going to turnkey us a bunch of cars. what they could spare, and we were probably going to end up going Dodge at the time. But you can't just really start from scratch. You've got to depend on some other people to come through for you. We really thought, as of a Wednesday, that was a done deal. And then Friday we heard that their money backing them out of New York had just fizzled. So it was maybe the biggest letdown, at least one of the two biggest, that with Obama striking that pin and outlawing Red Man right off the side of our car. Those were the two big, bitter disappointments.
And losing the two cup races would rank up there somewhere, I believe, in the top 3 or 4, wouldn't it?
Yeah, I would. That was in a prior decade. I guess I was just saying the two biggest disappointments in the last 3 years.
That was another lifetime, wasn't it?
Another lifetime watching those go out the window.
And I think Joe wants to get into the to the local racing scene too, Gary, and maybe get your perspective on some of the things that might be swirling around here this coming year, this new year.
Yeah, we've talked some about Project Nashville Skyline, Gary. The redevelopment of the fairgrounds has been the driving force, if you will, in local racing the past couple of years. The Nashville mayor seemed very adamant that he was going to get rid of the racetrack, get rid of the fairgrounds, period. Highland Rim went through some troubles, and then the partners all got together, saved that place. It looks like it's well on its way to coming back to being what it's always been, and that's a great little facility. The fairground's still kind of in limbo. Redevelopment, and I think, I don't know how much you've had a chance to see some of the things that are going on, but redevelopment into an entertainment complex with even RV parks and broadcast centers and multiple restaurants,
music venues.
Yeah, music, just a whole complex. I mean, a complete redevelopment and entertainment, including racing.
Yeah.
Is that a viable concept? Absolutely, it's a viable concept, and it's one that would work better in Nashville, obviously, than any city you can think of, for a lot of reasons. Obviously, again, Music City, USA, destination city. The new show Nashville that's on ABC Wednesday nights at 9 o'clock Central.
And has its headquarters at former Baker Curb Racing.
That's why I'm sort of putting that little plug in there. It is
not to bring up any source points, but
nothing like that. But a lot of reasons that would work in Nashville better than anywhere else. Not the least of which is the fact that Nashville has a facility like that, where you're dealing with about 116 acres of prime developable property in the heart of the city. That just so happens already has a racetrack sitting on it, and not just a racetrack, but a racetrack that in the short track circles of racing in this country is thought of as the Daytona of short tracks. It has just always been at the top. Some of the history has proven that. It's one of the short tracks that was a Cup venue for years on end, and whatever the second oldest stop on the Cup circuit.
Right.
Gary, we had to interrupt you just quickly. We had a couple of the guys from this project on the show recently. They're really bright guys. They know their stuff. One of them is former founder of the Hard Rock
and then House of Blues.
Yeah, they really know the stuff. The drawback, one of the hurdles I see is the place is kind of landlocked, and of course you fought that for years. The effect on the surrounding community, the entrance, exit for large crowds like that. Is that something that can be overcome at that location?
Not easily. Perhaps earlier in a different time and place, it could have been more easily, where you could have used the power of eminent domain to take properties for the public good and redevelop. Would it be good for Nashville? Yes, but
good for that community in general.
Good for that community in general. But if you have one little old grandmama there that we all want to hug and love and all that stuff, and she says, this is my house and I want to die right here in this house, and I hope it's 15 years from now, you run into that, obviously, social conflict. Yeah. And now, in the current setting, it is not as easy to take private land for private development. And that's, of course, what it would end up being.
And you'd almost have to do that to draw the kinds of crowds that I think they're looking at to make it viable, to get people in and out. Even some of your crowds, you had 20,000 and more for your Cup cup races, and even back then, you know, in '84 when they left, that was a tough deal to get that many people in and out, and I just didn't know if it's doable. Joe had suggested maybe some kind of shuttle or something like that, but I just don't know. You know more about big crowds at the fairgrounds than anybody, and I just wondered if you thought it was something they could overcome.
That is going to be obviously ingress, egress, major. It's one of the first considerations. That's why that area out in Bells Bend that we were looking at, where you had, automotive with 2 bridges coming in across the river, railroad and boat, not only the Opryland shuttles, but also even private boats with a marina there. You look for all these ways. Well, that wouldn't work too well in a fairground setting. And
it'd be tough to get a boat up Browns Creek.
Tough to get it up there. I've seen it a couple of times that you could. You could have brought in the General Jackson, I think, a couple of times. But for the most part, that's going to be a major hurdle. Now, it depends on what number of people they're going to be looking at. And particularly if you're not just talking about one event issues at the venue. If you are talking about multiple restaurants and multiple facets going simultaneously, then you don't have to worry about peak loads like you do when you're
might
dealing with a
stream
race.
in and out.
Exactly.
And again, Gary, this wouldn't be your first rodeo, because when you ran the place, you were an innovator in terms of entertainment. You had fanfare out there. You brought fanfare to the fairgrounds. So the location.
Well, we did. Back at that time, we were looking for ways to utilize the facilities other than just automobile racing. And we had several things that we were working at the time. I remember Native American Council. Joe, you might remember that. We had really worked with them to get that event here. And that was going to be a pretty major event, but the Fair Board just shot that down like a World War I biplane. They just, just summarily shot it down. And I thought, man, how great this was going to be for the city of Nashville.
It made too much sense.
And the thing of it is, they were going to get much of the lease payment for the buildings. All we were going to get was a little old track footprint. They were going to get the buildings, and the city of Nashville was going to reap the benefit of all these people being here for a bigger part of a week.
And same way with fanfare, and that did go over well. Somebody eventually stole the concept from you and moved it, but that was your baby to bring fanfare in and bring all these tourists in and pump millions of dollars into the metro coffers at the same time.
I learned from the Native American situation, and when I can tell you, I was sitting in my office downtown one day, and I looked down and I saw these people. Remember, it started out at the Municipal Auditorium. And these people, the poor people, trying to squeeze on the sidewalks and all that in downtown with cars whizzing by and all that stuff. No parking, nowhere to go. And I, at the time, NLT, which owned Opryland, was a client. So I knew how to call the right people out there, and I called and said, let's have lunch. I remember I went out there to Opryland, and we had a full weigh with 3 of their heavyweights. And I said, guys, we have got to give these people some expansion room. And a place to do it, you could double or triple the size of fanfare, maybe even more so, move it out to the fairgrounds and the racetrack. You've got a perfect outdoor, it is outdoor, but you've got a perfect outdoor venue here, an amphitheater setting for the shows and all that stuff.
Plenty of parking?
Plenty of parking, and the buses can come and go, the individual automobiles come and go, no problems on any of that. And immediately, they adopted the concept and embraced the idea, and then Opryland jumped on it with both feet, and fanfare became the next step up. It became much larger than it was, it was at the Municipal Auditorium.
And did great things for the racetrack, because now we are finishing up one Saturday night and immediately taking down fences and moving things around and getting stages set. They would finish the concerts on Friday night and would immediately begin to break down stages, put fences back, and on Saturday night, they'd all come see us and race a little while before they went to the Opry.
Yeah, back to racing. But the one thing I did learn from that was, don't make the Fair Board think it was my idea.
Keep your name off of it.
I don't remember, as Stone, I believe, out there at, I made sure they contacted the Fair Board. And the fair boy thought that was the greatest thing since grits.
But Gary, your experience is not only rooted in stock car racing. You've got this overlap with entertainment. You know, you had clients like Johnny Cash, Waylon Jennings, T.G. Shepard, just on and on and on. Close friend of Marty Robbins. So you know the partnership that stock car racing used to have with the national entertainment industry, particularly the country music industry. And I'm wondering if that partnership. I think that's what these guys are kind of looking at, to kind of renew that that racing entertainment partnership. Is it that era gone and lost forever, or could it be revived like it was when you were running things?
It's still there. It was perhaps a little stronger then because it was more embellished then. Yeah. But if there was ever two concepts that went together, hand in glove, it would be country music and NASCAR stock car racing. I mean, both, look at the background, the roots, the history of both of them. They sort of came up, went through their birthing and childhood and adolescence side by side in the good old South. And they came up and they hit the national stage pretty much simultaneously. When John Cash is going on nationwide television and acing out the ratings with his show, is about the time the 79 and all that debacle with at Daytona, which ended up putting NASCAR on the national stage. So the two have always been parallel. But I guess the time when, if there was a light bulb that went off, it was sitting at Talladega in 1979 when Waylon Jennings was the sponsor on the number 4 car. And here are all the photographers. Here's all the media.
Who drove that car?
Yeah, that's a good question.
Some obscure driver that
Gary drove.
Gary Baker
Gary
drove
that car.
We did qualify 12, I think.
Yeah.
And we had old blunt-nosed Monte Carlo. NASCAR just knew G.C. Spencer had put a bottle somewhere on that car. They were all, I've never seen such an inspection.
I bet you didn't have to pay for that one.
If they charged inspection fees back then, we would have been had to rob a bank, because they were all over that. That car was not supposed to run that fast with that old blunt-nosed Monte Carlo. The only two made the race. That was how bad that the aerodynamics were. But down there, driver introductions. Back then, you didn't get fined. Maybe I'm the reason they fine the drivers now or penalize them for missing driver. But there they are at start-finish line and driver introductions and all that. I'm headed down there, and somebody hollers, "Waylon just got here." And Waylon is walking across, and that black number 4 Flying W car, and here comes Waylon. He's walking over there to look at his car. Well, you'd have thought the Red Sea had parted and here came all the Israelites, because here came the mass of the media. They were all so anxious to photograph Waylon around his car. And there was nobody left down there at driver intros. It was just a really awkward scene.
You and the announcer.
Well, I ended up not making it down there as a result, and it was one of those kind of, I said, wow, man, I mean, these people really are hungry to see that. I remember in Grand National Scene that week, there were 3 pictures of Waylon or Waylon and I in the car or whatever. There was one picture of Buddy Baker, and he won the race. But I'm saying, okay, there is a natural hookup here, and people want to pursue that hookup. And of course, we put that to use with the T.G. Shepard Folgers coffee machine with Procter & Gamble, and it ended up being the greatest single, and here's a company that spends like $7 billion a year in marketing, but it was the most successful marketing program they have ever run in the history of Procter & Gamble.
Wow.
Joe, before we get away from Waylon Jennings, I got my favorite story when he's, like Gary said, he was sponsoring the car and he had the big W with the wings on the hood. And a couple of races later, he decided to get out of it. And I said, Waylon, what happened? He said, well, Gary took my car out one day and it had a W on the M, and he had a W on the hood, and he brought it back and it was an M. it was upside down. You had turned Waylon's W into an M.
I kept forgetting you're supposed to keep the rubber side down, you know. I just kept forgetting that part.
But what a relationship it was back then, Gary, between NASCAR and country music. And remember, Joe, some of the top NASCAR drivers came in with Jimbo Donahoe and made a NASCAR Goes Country album down on Music Road.
Oh, yes.
Petty, Pearson, Waltrip, Yarborough, Allison, somebody else. There are about 5 or 6 or 7 of those guys.
David Pearson was in on it,
yeah, and we found out most of them could definitely drive better than
they could sing.
Although Pearson did a pretty good Maybelline, I remember on that. I still got my album.
Okay, with that one, let's get our first break of this particular edition out of the way. When we come back, I got something. You remember the last show of last year? I promised something special. Well, something special for both of these guys. We'll get to that in our next segment. First, though, while I'm still alive, we're going to remind you about our friends at Highland Rim. We've talked about them a little bit, but don't forget, Highland Rim Speedway getting ready to start, yes, their 51st season coming up on the hill up in Ridgetop, Tennessee. Be sure to go by and check out highlandrim.com and get the schedule, get everything ready. When we come back, Gary Baker, Larry Woody, and they're going to be on the spot. Trust me. We'll be back on Pit Pass.
Today's show is brought to you by locally owned and operated Highland Rim Speedway. Highland Rim Speedway is celebrating its 50th anniversary this year with great short track door-to-door stock car racing in a safe, family-friendly atmosphere. Visit their website at highlandrim.com.
Welcome back, everybody, to Pit Pass. Joe Williams along my idol, Larry Woody sitting here. You know, we appreciate you joining us each week, and if you have some good comments, at least we're hoping they'd be good comments, or maybe some suggestions, please be sure and go by and check out our Facebook page at facebook.com/PitPass Talkapolis.
Talkapolis.
Yeah. Pit Pass Talkapolis.
You can also Google it up on the internet.
Yes, you can. Get the app on the Android or the iPhone. Of course, if you're watching us, you've probably already done that. All right, I promised these guys, I've tried to pitch this in a bad way, but here's the deal. You've got to understand that these two fellas have many, many years, as you've already figured out, in racing between them.
We're old, Gary, is what he's trying to say.
He's trying to get to in a polite way.
They've known everybody. So, you know, having seen my therapist last week, I thought it would be fun just to play a little word association game today. Or actually, we're going to call it name association. Some of the folks you guys have known over the years, and Larry, I want you in on this too.
I hadn't seen these, Gary.
Yeah.
I
got a big list. This is the rest of the show.
Okay.
Because I think you'll have some fun with these.
Okay, it's quick and snappy, right?
Yeah, well, you don't have to be too quick.
Okay.
If you come up with a good story, tell it.
Okay.
Darrell Waltrip.
The first time I met Darrell, he had shaggy hair and his old dirty fingernails and scruffy boots, and was wandering around the Gary's racetrack, or Bill Donahoe's racetrack at the time at the fairgrounds, and he's this old country boy from Owensboro, and I'm thinking, this guy's not going to go anywhere. And now he's one of the top drivers in the history of NASCAR. And I started following Darrell, and I kid him, our careers kind of parallel. I started covering NASCAR racing about the time Darrell arrived in Nashville, and I like to remind Darrell that he never won a race till I started covering him. And I covered his first Cup win. I went to Riverside, California, covered his first Cup championship. I covered his last race at Atlanta, and a whole lot of races in between. Still one of my favorite people. Not a super race driver, and just a genuinely nice guy.
Gary.
And he turned out to be just one of the nicest guys.
Yeah.
Aren't we glad Stevie got a hold of him?
Boy, ain't that the truth.
She worked wonders, didn't she?
Probably the first thing that comes, the one time it was one of those pre-race deals, probably a day or two before the race, and we're making the TV station rounds. We're going from one station to the other, and of course we were doing the good-natured thing. He was in one car, I was in the other, and yeah, it is. The natural competitive juices start coming out every once in a while.
No, you didn't.
The bottom line of the story is he got nailed and I didn't. And needless to say, yeah, that was a pretty good laugh for a while. But I can't remember. I think he talked his way out of the ticket because he was trying to tell him the guy should have stopped me. But it was one of those deals that, needless to say, we laughed a long time about that one.
Darrell always told me he was afraid when he got stopped by the cops, the highway patrolman, would tell him he's Darrell Waltrip. He said, "What if the guy's an Ellison fan?" He said, I was always a little leery about.
That's true.
Not everybody was a Darrell Waltrip fan back then.
Not everybody at the time.
Sticking with drivers, Sterling Marlin.
country boy who's ascended to the pinnacle of his profession, won 2 Daytona 500s, and it's not a bit different from the country boy in Murray County who used to go out and chop cotton barefoot.
They don't come any better as far as good old plain country boys that started out that way and to this day is still that way. But of course, Cuckoo and Eula Fay would have whooped him if he had changed to any degree. But the funniest thing about Sterling was probably one of the races we were running, the 24-hour Daytona. And he and I co-drove. Back then, you would do it with 2 drivers. Nowadays, they have as many as 5 in a car. But back then, typically you would do 2 hours in and 2 hours out. And I went in at midnight, and 2 a.m. I'm due to come out. They radio me, can't find Sterling. Okay, I'll do another hour. 3 o'clock. We can't find Sterling. Okay, I'll do another hour. That went on until 5 a.m.
Oh!
Yes, 5 a.m. And as well as I remember, at 5, they had finally found him. And I'm not sure, it might have been 6. They monitor that now. They don't let that happen. But back then, you were in the car 5 or 6 hours. Okay, you were in there 6 hours. Finally, we got him in the car. After 2 hours, Sterling was ready to come out, and I'm sitting there shaking my head. There is no way. And I don't remember. I think we made him stay in there like 4 hours, and he was fussing the whole time. But Sterling was he was hard to find sometimes.
I'm almost afraid to ask Gary where he was. So, next name.
Let's Bobby Hamilton.
Another rags to riches story. Bobby Hamilton grew up in Nashville, just literally on the streets at times. Dad had some issues, and he was living on the street at one time, and just through sheer willpower and force and determination, he made himself a top racing celebrity. Drove for Richard Petty, won Richard's first race, his team owner, went on to form his own truck team, won a truck championship.
Yep.
And just a super nice guy, and I was always so impressed. He always called Bobby Hamilton a poor man's Dale Earnhardt. He did the same thing that Earnhardt did on a local level.
Bobby Hamilton, a poster child for fortitude, because he had it in spades. And he was just one of those guys that, again, stayed true to who he was at the end as much as he was at the beginning. Kind of guy you just couldn't help but like him, and he was willing to do anything for anybody at any time. But the main thing, old Frank Sinatra song, I did it my way, Bobby did it his way. And when people would tell him, just like they would tell Curb and I, you can't do it in Nashville. Bobby and I talked about that more than once, that there are far more advantages to basing a race team in Nashville than there are disadvantages. There are a few, true, but far more advantages, and Bobby would not be persuaded to the contrary, and I admire him for it.
A lot of folks may not remember, he went 6 for 6 one night, technically 8 for 8. It may have been 87. Was running on both the quarter mile and the 5/8 mile racetrack. He sets fast time in both, gets pole in both groups, wins a heat race, his only heat race in both, and won both twin features in both divisions. Greatest single performance I think we've ever seen at the fairgrounds. The guy goes 6 for 6, 8 for 8, however you want to count it.
And at one point in his career was so broke he couldn't afford tires, and his mother had to loan him enough money to buy tires to race on that weekend.
Yeah.
He did it his way.
He did.
Yeah, and he was good at it.
Yep.
Mike Alexander.
Tough little guy, unlimited potential, and his career, of course, as most people know, is cut short by a head injury at Snowball Derby in Pensacola one year. But a lot of people, when he came up through the ranks when Gary was running the track, thought Mike Alexander would be our next Darrell Waltrip. He had it all. He was an intelligent young guy, handled himself well with the media, and a super racing talent. And there's no telling, he could have been our next Darrell Waltrip. He could have been a NASCAR champion. He was that good, but the injury cut his career, ended his career for all practical purposes.
True. We're neighbors now. I know Mike, think the world of Mike then and now. As Larry's already alluded, if it were not for that career-ending injury, the potential. At the time, of course, it was Mike Alexander and Sterling Marlin. Those were the two. They were the up-and-comers. Sterling goes on to win multiple Daytona 500s, and Mike gets put to the sidelines because of that unfortunate incident. Where he could have gotten, I'm with Larry. He could have been right up there at the top alongside Sterling, and he could have been running for national championships. He had that kind of talent.
You'll recall, Mike came back and won another track title at Nashville before he hung up his helmet. But guys, if you'll recall, he was basically leading what was then the Busch Series.
Yeah.
When Bobby Allison got injured at Pocono, head injury that took Bobby out. And the Miller folks called and said, Mike, we want you to drive this car. He stepped in to drive the car and had finished third in Atlanta in the last race of the year. And it's like, hey, Bobby doesn't get better. We've got something ready to go for Daytona before just the tragedy in Pensacola.
But he had it all, the talent and the charisma, and there was no limit to how high he could have gone.
And his young son.
And
Clay
personality.
is coming on.
He's a super guy, as everybody knows. Mike knows, just a really good guy.
Silver lining to that, there was some friction between, maybe not so much between Mike and Sterling as it was between Sterling's dad, Cuckoo, and Mike's dad, R.C. Alexander, that went back for years because they've been racing against each other for so long. This kind of healed that. They became friends again. And
the fan factions, I was covering, of course, at the time, and Mike and Sterling both said we're good friends. We like each other. It's the family feud and the fan connections that kept everything fired up.
That goes back to the day when I would sit in the grandstands and watch the Alexander cars always run against the Cuckoo Marlin cars, the Marlin cars. And it was Hatfields and McCoys to a major degree. It was just fought out on a racetrack instead of in the hills of West Virginia.
Sold a lot of tickets, didn't it?
It sold tickets.
And newspapers.
And sold me some.
Sold tickets and newspapers, Joe.
Gary, Tim Richmond.
Now you start talking about talent, natural talent. You talk about an Ayrton Senna in Formula One and a Tim Richmond. Can you imagine how good it could have been, Tim Richmond and Dale Earnhardt? Those two up there, both the same, cut out of the same cloth from the standpoint of maybe not off track by any means, but they're on track driving, just two absolute twins in the way they drove. Tim was just vivacious, outgoing. He was fun to be around. Obviously, he just liked to party a little too much, and that ended up obviously being his downfall. We worked real closely with him in the Procter & Gamble days. That's where we got to be pretty close, and that's why he would do anything for you, come to the track even when his health said he shouldn't be at the fairgrounds track. But wow, the talent. If we could have just ever gotten a collar around his neck off track and kept him turned loose on track, because some of the stories between Tim Richmond and Harry Hyde when they were running that Hendrick car, the Folgers 25, there were so many stories that would do well to make a movie out of today. But
did they not? Is that not
there was a lot of
basis in Days of Thunder?
In Stand On It by Stoker Ace, the book originally, and then Days of Thunder. Some of the stuff I read in the book Stand On It, Stoker Ace, some of it was just Harry Hyde, Tim Richmond all over. There was a little David Pearson and a few of those guys in there as well, but and G.C. Spencer. But there was also a whole lot of Tim Richmond and Harry Hyde.
Larry, always good for a quote, wasn't he?
Yeah, he had Dale Earnhardt talent and a Joe Namath lifestyle.
Good summation.
Yeah, but like Gary said, he had it all. I mean, people who know more about race driving much more than I do, like Gary Baker, said when just analyzing sheer talent, a man behind the wheel of a stock car on a racetrack, there wasn't any better than Tim Richmond was.
Those are just some of the greats these guys have gotten to work with over the years. When we come back, we're going to talk about names that you may or may not know, but folks that were critical, at least in my mind, to what we've had here in Nashville. Now, that's when we come back. If we get lost, don't worry. We may be on our way to USA Motor and Machine. I think I got a little knock in the engine. We're going to go over and let the guys look at it, because that's my daily driver. If it's your race car, you can go see them too. That's USA Motor and Machine over on Cleveland Avenue. Stay with us. We're going to come back for our final segment right after this.
From the family grocery hauler to fire-breathing racing engines, the one name you need to know is USA Motor and Machine, located at 51 Cleveland Avenue in Nashville, Tennessee. Give them a call at 615-726-3725 or at usamotorandmachine.com.
And welcome back, everybody, to our final segment today on Pit Pass, the first one of the 2013 year. I never dreamed I'd live to be this old. But, you know what? Just to mark it, I think I'm going to give myself a present, and before the day's over, I'm going to go over to the batter's box on Hermitage Avenue and get me something to eat. I obviously have broken that New Year's resolution already, so it won't be a big deal. Visiting with my idol Larry Woody and, of course, Nashville racing legend Gary Baker, and we've been putting them kind of on a word association or name association test here in the last few minutes, and we've talked a lot about drivers. Well, you know, not everybody in racing is a driver. There's some colorful characters, very colorful characters sometimes, who do more than drive, and probably three of the great promoters in the world. And two of them, anyway, could be qualified as characters.
You going to hit Gary first?
Now, I'm leaving Gary out.
Oh, okay.
He's in the top four, but I'm leaving him out of this. Bill Donahoe.
Well, we're going back in the history books now. I remember the day we first started talking with him. That was Lanny Hester and I. That would have been in 79, early part of 79. He was tired. He was through. He had been there, done that, and he was ready to hang it up. And he was, as far as I was concerned, I heard all the tales about old southern town, did we say politics or police force? I don't know
both,
which.
Both, yeah.
Because I think they were all tied into one at the time. But he ran it with some of that. He partially ran the city with some of that old southern town politics, police force, but he did it in a benevolent way. And I always thought the world of that guy.
Larry, did he ever throw you out?
No, we never.
He threw out a lot of folks. He never threw you out.
For some reason, I hit it off well with Bill Donahoe.
But you did it his way, I can tell you that.
I kind of did it his way, and there were a couple of times we did butt some heads. You know, I remember there was one time when he got involved in some kind of mini scandal about telling one of the drivers to slow down and make a better show of it. Boyd Adams' son, Gary Adams, was blowing away a second division, and Donahoe called him in and chewed him out and ordered him to either move up to a different division or slow down. He was stinking up his show, and some pretty heated words there. And Darrell Walter even got involved in it because he said Donahoe used to tell him to do the same thing, slow down and catch up. And I said, isn't that fixing a race? And he said, no, it's no more than a football team's got a big lead in the fourth quarter. You kind of slow down and you send in some of your subs, and you don't get anybody hurt, but you're not throwing the game or anything.
It's also known as debris on the track.
Yeah, debris on the track.
Bill was always, he liked to be in control, but he always had a rationalization for why his control made best sense.
Yeah, it was an entertainment. He said the fans are our customers, and we need to entertain our fans. Joe, the couple of things I remember about about Bill Donahoe, it used to drive him nuts because the track would provide cushions, seat cushions for fans to sit on those hard seats. And sometimes when fans would get bored, they would sail them over the fence, and Donahoe would get on the PA system and order the fans to quit throwing the cushions on the track. The other one was, I think this is true, but I couldn't swear to it, that if you had any popcorn left over from the previous Saturday night, the next Saturday night when he popped new popcorn, he would save the old and mix it in with the new, so he didn't waste any popcorn. And also, after the races were over, Donahoe carried a pistol. Mr. Donahoe carried a pistol. He would go to the pay window, take his pistol out, lay it on the window, have a stack of, they paid cash money. Oh, yeah. And the drivers would line up, and Donahoe, you finished third in the late model division, you owe $300, count it out. And with the pistol lying there, that's how Donahoe paid his drivers back in those days. And I don't think, Gary, nobody ever argued with him.
One of my Mr. Donahoe sat one afternoon in the offices up there, told story after story. One of my favorites. And I have to tell this on him because I think it's classic. You'll truly appreciate this. Bill Gazaway was the NASCAR director at the time.
Inspector.
No, he was in
director inspector.
Director inspector.
Yeah.
He was in. He was up there watching.
Yeah.
And they've come in for a cup race, and everything's set, place is packed, everything's good, and they go about 100 laps and there's no caution. It's a 420 lap race, and they go about 150 and there's no caution. Mr. Donahoe goes down and says, Bill, I think there's something over off of turn 2. And he says, well, hang on, your radio's around. He says, no, there's nothing there, Mr. Donahoe. He says, uh-huh. So he said, I went out, and he says, about 225, I'm getting nervous because we still had a caution. And I go in, and I say, Bill, you sure there's not some debris down on the back straightaway? No, there's nothing there, Bill. You know, we got this covered. Okay. He said, so sure enough, he said, lap 305 gets here, and we still hadn't had a caution. It's getting late. And the laps are winding down, and I walked down and opened the door, and Gazaway just looked could see me in the window and hollered, Bill, there's nothing on the racetrack. And I just reached over and grabbed him by the shoulder and said, Gazaway, can you eat 10,000 hot dogs? Gazaway got on the radio. We got debris at turn 3. Let's put it out. It's on the inside. You can't see it from here.
Well, that's what I mean. Bill Donahoe realized stock car racing is a sport, but it's also entertainment, and he wanted his races entertaining, and that's why he called some drivers in who were, in his words, stinking up my show, and told them to back off or move up to a higher division.
Bob Harmon, Uncle Bob.
Our first real interface would have been the All-American 400 when and Bob came with Rex Robbins, and I'm trying to remember the guy from Canada. Now
Tom Curley.
Curley, thank you, with the Canadian, and we started kicking that around. And again, to the credit of the city of Nashville and the Fairgrounds track, when they first started talking about it, they said the one track in this country that this makes sense to run is at Music City. And then they approached me with it, and I remember sitting in the office, and that was the first time really Bob Harmon, character. And when he came in to do a show, it was a family affair as far as he was concerned. You remember his sister and all that would be there. And it was truly a family love affair because they loved the sport, and Bob could tell you some stories from back in the early days of race promoting that made you thankful for your forefathers in the sport and what it took to get us here. He'd been here a long time, but Bob was a classic promoter from the old Carney days of Ringling Brothers, Barnum and Bailey Circus.
Now, Larry, Bob later in the 90s wound up with the lease at the fairgrounds. You guys never crossed horns, did you?
A time or two. We crossed a time or two, but it was interesting Gary mentioned carnival because Darrell Waltrip said that's what Bob Harmon was like, an old-fashioned carnival barker. He said he needs a cane and a straw hat and a candy-striped suit up on a flatbed truck, and he just about did that. He would promote races from a flatbed truck in the old days, pull it up in front of the grandstands, hop up on the flatbed truck and promote them. And one thing, Joe, you're talking about some of the behind-the-scenes stories. Bob Harmon told me once when he was promoting races down some little track in Alabama, he brought in Wendell Scott.
Yep.
And he said he brought it in against all kinds of opposition. Wendell, of course, being the only black driver in stock car racing at the time, or the premier one anyway. And Bob, despite opposition, he said people were complaining, warning him, getting threats, phone calls at night, don't bring Wendell Scott in if you know what's good for you. Harmon brought him in. Nobody would let Wendell stay in a hotel back then or eat in a restaurant. That was unheard of. So Bob Harmon brought him over, put Wendell Scott up in his house, and ate and fed him at his dinner table. So that's the kind of Bob, he wasn't all just a crusty old promoter. Harmon had like most of you guys, he had a heart of gold after you get past the crust. He was a great man.
He did that in Montgomery, Alabama, folks.
Yeah.
That ought to say enough right there.
As I say, he was warned not to bring Wendell in. Not only brought him in and let him race, put him up in his house and fed him. We butted heads over little things like, good example, Terrell Davis, our good friend, wanted to sell a racing magazine, a tabloid out there one time, and Harmon was giving us some static about that, and I tried to explain, look, Terrell's doing you a favor. He's one of the few people still giving you some publicity back here. But ours, Joe, are little minor skirmishes like we're mine and Gary's. We never had a serious headbutting, and the last time I was with Bob. It was a couple of months before his death, and he invited me to lunch at a local restaurant. And when we got there, we got out, and Bob was in such bad shape he could barely walk from the car up to the restaurant steps, and just really, you know, really heartbreaking. But a good person, one of my all-time favorites.
Now, Gary, folks help you succeed here, people in the media. And we've had some great ones come through this town. Give me your thoughts here. Just the first thing pops in your head. Larry Woody.
You want me to walk outside?
Woodrow, I think I've already alluded, what was it, a week ago, to the fact that here in Nashville we took for granted the sports writers we had. And of course, now in hindsight, you look back on the importance of the sports writers, because that was your main source of information in current matters of stock car racing. But Larry Woody and Joe Caldwell were at the pinnacle as far as I'm concerned. And other than really one name I can put in the same category of them from over in Charlotte, North Carolina, I think those two guys were in the top three in the country. Now,
Probably
I've
Tom
got to say
Higgins. Is that who you're?
well, you've nailed it. That's exactly who
That was
I'm
easy,
thinking.
wasn't
That was
it?
who I'm thinking.
Yeah.
Now, Woodrow, at times, yeah, at times I thought, hey, he had newspapers to sell. We had tickets to sell, and at times maybe, okay, you got to sensationalize things. And at the time, be realistic, it was the largest sports story in the city. It was the only professional sport in the city other than AAA baseball. At the time, I think it was AAA, it later went to double. It was the big story. So yeah, it would sell newspapers. And luckily, happily, it was on the front page. And about 80% of the time, it was on the front page in a positive way. And those 20%ers that got a little negative, Woodrow and I would, but hey man, we'd talk about it, and then, okay, we'd work. I remember once the question was about beer in the infield during the course. Oh man, now that one, that one was serious in my eyes. And I do remember finally, I had my guys undercover plainclothesmen go down there, let me know if there's anything going on. Because Woodrow was certain there was, and I was certain there was not. And after a week or so of that, and me getting the reports it wasn't happening, I called him once. I think we were up there, and I said, okay, money where your mouth is, put a $100 bill down. You and I are walking down there together. If you can find it, you pick up both of them. And if you can't find it, I'll pick up both of them. He didn't take me up on it.
No, he worked for the newspaper. He didn't have $100. I can answer that.
Okay, I'll give you the real story.
Okay, now
we're
the real
talking
story.
about the Alexander Marlin feud, and Mike Alexander said, I mean, they were, as you know, fisticuffs after some of those races. They were the security guard having to pull the Marlins off the Alexanders and vice versa. Mike said, look, this isn't between Sterling and me. He said, it's those crazy Marlins. They show up drunk. They're drinking when they get to the track. They got beer in the cars. They drink during the race, and they're all boozed up. And this is where the problem comes from. And he called me over and said, look over, this is a Saturday afternoon, look over here. They go over there, and there are some drivers. I don't know if they're Marlins or not. They're not drivers, they were
Fans,
people in the infield. They've got the coolers in the trunks of the car iced down with beer. And Mike says, there's your problem. So I write about it. I think I get a quote from Gary, and he says, no, we don't allow beer in the infield. I said, Gary, I just was down there 2 hours ago. The red Torino down there has got a trunk full of beer iced down. He said, well, if you can find it. Then this went on. I wrote the story, Mike saying this was the problem, beer, alcohol in the infield. It created a lot of the problems they were having with security and fisticuffs and so forth. Gary said, no, we don't allow it. We check. We tell our inspectors to check. We don't allow it. That's the rule. Anybody gets caught with it are out of here. And so that kind of went back and forth. But when Gary offered me $100 to go down there, I was afraid they might have drunk it by then. And I didn't have $100.
So you work for a newspaper.
But see, little things like that,
he always has a good answer.
But those were,
what made him
like
a good
I told
writer.
Gary, I said, Gary, I saw it. The beer fairy didn't make it appear. There's a guy.
No, but to his credit, it did bring, if there was an issue with it, it brought it to the head.
Yeah.
And you better believe we addressed it. And
to Gary's credit, he said, I'm not aware of it, and I've told my inspectors to look out for it, and if they find it, they're out. So it was going on underneath Gary's super.
And we did find one after the fact. I remember as plain as day. You know, they were checking, and they would even go and ask people to hand them their Coke can because the subterfuge. You pour it in a Coke can kind of deal. And sure enough, one of the record drivers down there, and when they checked, they said, "Yep, it doesn't smell right. It doesn't smell like any Coca-Cola I've ever smelled, and all that." And
especially the Pepsi truck.
I said, "Okay, thank you, Larry, for having us." And I went down there myself. I went personally to show him where the back gate was, and I wanted to see the tail end of that record going out the gate.
And Gary told me that at the time. He said, "Look, I go down there and personally walk around and inspect and look." And he said, "I don't see it." And I said, "Well, I just saw it that one time, Gary." But I said, "This is not my allegation. This I'm reporting what some other people are telling me." But you know, this is how. Like I say, it wasn't a big thing. It was obviously Gary was looking out for the image of the track.
Exactly.
And,
image.
And I think in the long run it helped because I think it maybe helped solve a problem that might have gotten out of control if it hadn't, if the lid hadn't been put on it.
Last question for you. Going to throw three guys in together, former employees that have gone on to greater things. Ed Clark, Eddie Gossage, Tom Roberts. Well, how's that for a line? How'd you like to have all them back?
First of all, explain who they are and where they are now.
I was going to say all of them came through the offices at Fairground Speedway, Nashville International Raceway.
Gary Baker hired them.
Yeah, Baker hires them. Eddie Gossage, of course, is president or vice president at Texas Motor Speedway. Ed Clark's president down in Atlanta, I believe.
Yes.
And Tom Roberts is the owner of TRPR and has been on the circuit for 28 years or better, 25, 28.
Probably the oldest NASCAR PR company.
Longest yet, and is continuously. I mean, he is the veteran.
And what they have in common is Gary Baker hired them and gave them their start.
Yeah.
Eddie Gossage, first time to talk with him, he let it be known that his aspiration, his highest calling in life, he was going to be the PR director of the Green Bay Packers. And I remember the discussion was, Eddie, you just may decide you'd throw rocks at the Green Bay Packers after you get into this. As well as I remember, he came from MTSU,
right.
and that was where he was headed, Green Bay Packerdom. But obviously, I think he has found something better now at Texas Motor. Ed Clark is one of those guys that sort of grew up with us both at Nashville and Bristol. Both of those guys did move back and forth. I think Tom Roberts pretty well stayed at Nashville his whole tenure with us. But Ed Clark, just one of those quiet, laid-back, easy-going, humble guys that just quietly gets the job done. And you talk, I've had conversations with the governor of Georgia that just think Ed Clark walks on water. He's one of those type guys. And of course, Tom is just good old Tom. You just, I don't know, I just sort of see Tom, I get tickled. I want to laugh just because he just brings that out.
Oh. I'm hoping to get him. Hopefully we're going to have TR on the show. I'd like to have all three of them actually at some point before we're done.
I think Eddie will do it.
Even do it, but we can do it by Skype and get it done.
Gossage still has family in Murfreesboro and comes in frequently. Eddie worked at the Tennessee in the Tennessee and Sports Department for a while.
Yeah.
And back in the old days, there was a precursor to the fax machine. You had something called a telecopier.
Oh, yeah.
And you had to, when the writers would go out and file stories, you would have to, it would come in on a cylinder, and you had a piece of paper you had to put in, and it had to be glossy side up and matte side down. Eddie could never remember which side was up. And after screwing up FM Williams' UT story on deadline for 4 or 5 times, FM told Eddie maybe he better find another line of work. Eddie was a student at MTSU at the time. He said, look, I've got to have a job. I'm working my way through school. He was a racing fan, went out and talked to Gary. Gary gave him a job at the fairgrounds, then did such a good job, you promoted him to Bristol, help out up there. Did such a good job that Bruton Smith called his eye and stole him from you, and then sent him to Texas to run it.
We were a pretty good training ground for Bruton Smith.
Super guy. Tom Roberts, the super guy when he had the beer sponsorship, Miller Beer, Bobby Allison. Eddie and Bobby would come in frequently, and we'd go out and eat Uncle Bud's catfish at Franklin. I've never seen anybody could eat as many catfish as Bobby Allison. And interesting anecdote about TR, he was also Alan Kowicki's PR person after the year that Kowicki won the championship, and Tom was scheduled to fly to Bristol from his home down below Atlanta on the Hooters plane.
I think they weren't they in Knoxville, and he was due to be on the plane just to jump up to Bristol.
Well, Tom told me that he normally flew with them, but that day, the day before, when they were arranging it, he said, for some reason, I just decided to drive. He said it was a pleasant
He ended
day.
up driving.
He
Yes.
ended-
I thought
story.
it was from Knoxville, but it doesn't matter.
He might have been
ended up
supposed to
driving.
meet him at Knoxville and flying up to Bristol.
It was sort of like
but-
the Wayland story with the Big Bopper. He would have been on the plane.
Tom was
typically.
scheduled to be on the plane that crashed
Absolutely.
and killed Kowicki. Ed Clark, just like Ed said, just a super nice, like Gary said about Ed, just a super nice guy. You know, known him all his professional career. And he's dabbling in trout fishing and those what are the small cars that they race now? The
Legends.
Legends. He's in that now, and I've told him I don't know which is dangerous. Trout more dangerous for him wading a trout stream or driving those little Legends cars.
But he lights up when he starts talking about those Legends cars.
He's
lights
just
up like a
possessed by
kid.
it.
Yes.
Gary, thank you so much for joining us.
It's my pleasure. And
I
mean
appreciate
that.
giving us 2 weeks. I mean, you know, it's not often we get somebody for 2 weeks.
Well, with you guys around here, it's you call me anytime.
We will
You're fun
do
guys
that.
to be around.
Happy New Year to you.
And,
Larry, to you.
these race stories are going to be evolving through the new year, so
Oh, yeah.
who better to ask about and get
That's-
their take than Gary Baker, who knows more about automobile racing than anybody in Tennessee.
You're exactly right. Folks, we want to thank you for joining us. It has been a fantastic start to the 2013 season. Stay with us. Keep watching right here on Talkapolis. We will continue, hopefully, with Pit Pass. For our special guest, Gary Baker, Larry Woody, I'm Joe Williams. Thank you so much. We'll see you next time on Pit Pass.